the need for globally ambitious and effective action on climate change is as important and as urgent as ever. But of course, I mean, the context is more challenging than what it has been.
Indeed, and the big question is who is going to pay for all of this? On the agenda at this COP27 is this issue of loss and damage. Where is the money going to come from? Developed countries say they're not necessarily willing to pay because of the issues that we've just discussed. So how big is the financing gap?
Well, I mean, look, the finance gap has been increasing, and we certainly project that by 2030 we need about $4 trillion US in clean energy investment if we want to meet the carbon neutrality objectives by 2050, and that is a fourfold increase. And I mean, governments alone will not be able to fill that gap. We will need to take a very strategic approach and leverage as much as we can private sector investment using a whole range of different financing tools. Certainly developed economies need to fulfill their commitments. They need to step up to their responsibilities. The commitment of $100 billion worth of climate finance provided and mobilized by developed economies for developing economies, that needs to be met. And of course, but it will not be enough. There will be much more needed to come onto the table.
So significant pressure on public finances. How do you encourage the private sector to get involved when they're also as equally concerned for their bottom lines?
Well, we need to ensure that the vehicles are there, the projects are there, and to the extent that the public sector can help de-risk projects in which the private sector can invest, then of course that needs to be done. But we need a combination out of governments, multilateral finance, but indeed a blended finance, leveraging as much as possible private sector financing. But the key really is to have the quality projects there for the investment.
And they're few and far between, I guess you could say.
Well, I mean, there is an obvious need. There is a capacity for governments to do more, to de-risk projects, and we also need to make sure that investors can have confidence in the investment vehicles that are there.
Mathias, what is the role of the OECD in mitigating some of these climate challenges today?
Well, we seek to facilitate a globally more coherent, better coordinated approach to carbon mitigation. We also, of course, support, we monitor the commitment that was made by developed economies to provide $100 billion worth of climate finance to provide and mobilize for developing economies. And we also seek to provide advice on how to better adapt and make economies more resilient to climate change. I mean, climate change is a reality, and to a large extent across developed and developing economies, we need to ensure that we get better at living with some of the unavoidable consequences of climate change. So across all these areas, the OECD seeks to be a platform to provide advice, best practice advice, to facilitate dialogue, and to help ensure that actions in individual jurisdictions actually help solve the problem rather than just shift the problem into other parts of the world.
I wanted to ask you about the macroeconomic outlook as well. Clearly headwinds on the horizon. We've heard top Wall Street bankers talking about the prospects of a recession in 2023. How concerned are you by the current economic outlook and the impact that this is going to have on addressing these major climate challenges?
Well, I mean, there's an incredible amount of uncertainty, and you know, the world went through a 1 in a 100-year pandemic. We came out of that relatively quickly and strongly. But then, of course, Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine has caused another major supply shock, is driving lower global growth, higher inflation, higher energy and food prices, and lower energy and food security. And so, I mean, the most important economic policy priority for the world right now would be a return to a just peace in Ukraine as soon as possible. But, you know, that is not something that is, you know, directly under our control. That is under President Putin's control. And I mean, certainly, I think that he should reflect on the impact that he is having on the world. But like, I mean, look, there's much that needs to be done to deal with the short-term pressures, but we also got to continue to focus on those medium to long-term structural transformations across the economy to put ourselves in the best possible position for the future.